Well, they must have liked it the first time because the Woolwich Marina have called me back to do some more work. There's only one slight complication. Instead of being up on the slipway and in the workshop, the friggin' boat that I've got on is down on the water. Luckily for today, it's just demo work and measuring, and I'm actually going to try and do most of the actual carpentry in the workshop at home because there's a bit more to this one. It's going to take a few days. Bloody lovely around here, ain't it? Alright, well here she is. She's literally just a workboat runabout for the marina guys. Getting out of my own shadow. And don't know how old she is, timber boat. This is the mess that we've got to deal with. So we're basically replacing the engine cover and the deck, and also the wheelhouse too, just the stand that it was on. I've already had a peek. Not much of it is salvageable, so we're going to be almost building it from scrap. See, all that white frame needs to come out. The steering wheel and the old engine cover at the back there, you can see the rotten there. But this is the trouble. This is old Oregon, and that's what we're dealing with. My main concerns are that this is orange painted timber under here. It looks like it's gone too. Yeah, it's gone a little bit. And if that's stuffed, then I've got nothing to screw the new frame and deck onto. So I'm gonna be looking today to see if I can just actually do the bloody job. Because if too much of this is gone, then that's a job beyond my abilities to repair. That side not as bad. The first part of today's exercise, really, the reason I'm out here, was to get some very accurate measurements. So I've gone through and taken a good look at the frame and the engine mounts that I need to do. And this is my 70 by 60 Oregon, I think, something along those lines. And that is the deck section too. So taking important measurements, and the best thing is I can actually make this a bit oversized. So the really critical measurements are the ones between the bearers. These ones at the end, I can actually make them longer than I need to be and then trim them down when I come back to do the install on the final day. So these white members have been held in by these stainless steel bolts, but unfortunately they're so full of crap and gunk I can't actually get the socket down there to get them out. So I'm just cutting off with the Cipro saw on either side of the bolts, and then we can lift that off. And as usual, when you're dealing with rot, it never ends. So this was the edge of the bowels deck, and you can see that really soft fibery crap, and yeah, it's basically stuffed. So I've just used this, which is a hatch to get to the bilge pump, to use as a guide for the circular saw, running her along like that, and then cut as far as I can. I'll use the jigsaw to finish it off, and then we can just pull off this 19mm marine ply rotten bit, and it's actually got a good frame underneath, so I'll be able to re-stick another piece of 19mm on there and seal it up in between, and that'll give me the platform to rebuild the frame on top of. Okie dokie, well that's stage one done, and luckily it wasn't quite as bad as it could have been. So this is the foredeck where I've just had to rip off the edge. So see, there's a nice frame under there. I'm just going to be able to put the piece of ply over the top. A little bit of tiny cleaning to do. They're going to get in here hopefully and clean all the shit out of the hull, so it's all nice and clean. And on the other side, I've just had to remove that one piece of subframe, but the good news is I can still stand on that and it holds, so I should be able to jerry rig something up in there in order to just re-strengthen it, and then the whole new frame is going to go on top of that. Always nice to do something different into the bright Australian sun. Glad it's winter and my little ginger ass would be burning, and it's been good fun. We'll go home and plan out the materials and send them the bill for that, and then we'll get cracking in the Fixit Fingers workshop to actually do the construction part. So anyone who knows me knows I don't often buy wood, but for this I needed Oregon and I needed good quality marine ply. So I popped on down to Carpentry Timber, no affiliation, they just gave me some excellent service and made my life really easy. Gave me a space so that I could cut up all of the stuff in the car park and transport it home for building. However, the price at the moment, you're probably all aware, that's nearly $1,000 Australian worth of timber and fixings. In terms of the build, it's actually not terribly complicated, it's just stick construction really. So most of the job is just measuring out and chopping down these Oregon 2x4s into the correct dimensions, marking them out, and drilling a bunch of countersink pilot holes. As this would be dominating my garage for the next few days at least, I needed to get it set up nice and stable, so I quickly knocked up these handy fukas to raise my Kreg track horse up to the same height as my workbench and allow me to place the frame on there. Everything in this build has to be stainless steel for water resistance, also why we're using Oregon instead of pine, as it is slightly superior in that regard. For those unfamiliar, Oregon is what we call Douglas fir. You used to see lots of it. Half of Sydney is built with the stuff if you go into the roof of pretty much any house built from the early 20th century through, but it's fallen out of favour recently for more traditional pine in construction. Next, I quickly hacked out some noggins and spaced those appropriately. They got the same pre-drilling treatment before being screwed down. Can't use any glue in case this ever needs to be pulled out again. That's the frame done. All of the Oregon is cut and put into place. Now I have to go through and mark every single joint very carefully, because to get this back to the boat, I'm going to have to completely disassemble it, fit it in the wagon, and then reassemble it, and I want all my pilot holes to line up so that is not a pain in the ass. As is a filming in a garage and not having a table saw, playing the clamp dance as beautiful clouds dance across the sun. Poetic. Hashtag champ for all the things. I used nearly all of the offcuts in this build. Very little went to waste. Bit of silicone to provide waterproofing for these permanently attached pieces. Those cleats are to hold the main part of the deck in place, but all of the deck needs to be able to come off so they can get to the engine, the battery, and the other bits and pieces in the bilge below. So Chopper Chris, my circular saw, is going to be partnering with a couple of cutting guides and jigs on this build to get the bulk of the work done. The fore and aft decks on either side of the engine are going to be permanently attached-ish with screws. The others will just be floating. That little yellow doohickey is the Fit Finder by Microjig. I'll have more on that in a future video. Basically, it finds halfway points for things, so I have marked out the Oregon 2x4, used it to position the deck, and then also to mark out the screw lines. The larger deck sections were relatively easy to cut to size, except for these little checkouts that I needed in order to jigsaw puzzle them so they'd fit together nicely, and then when the engine cover goes over the top, it will hold all of the pieces down. That's the bloody deck built. Little bit gaps in here is because these pieces have got to come out. They're going to be painted as well, so I'm going to blame it on that. They're accurate enough for the job. This is where the engine goes. Next step is to build a giant cover for that. And I don't actually know where the curved edge of the boat goes, only that it's wider at the back than it is at the bow. So we're going to scribe this in when we get back to installation day. That engine access hole actually came in very useful during the build. More little cleats cut from off-cuts to position the engine cover once it is built. But as we stated, even though they're screwed down, those fore and aft mini decks need to be removable, so I had to quickly, over at the drill press, cut some access holes so the screws were not covered. I also only needed a handful of shorter stainless steel screws, which I did not own, so we trimmed down a few, and then chamfered all the things to make positioning the engine cover nice and easy, and it won't knock off the edges. There's a bit of 2x6 Oregon, making up the large square frame, which got the same butt joint drilled and screwed treatment. And now I apologise. Bonus points in the comments if you can name the reference. On a car just the other day, man, could that baby run? You're the first and last to ever see that. Lucky for you guys, copyright laws only allow me to share 7 seconds of my workshop singing. Back with Chopper Chris and the Kreg AccuCut for sizing the engine cover top, and then routering across the edge because chamfer all the things. Before screwing it down, grabbing Kevin the sander, and making it all pretty. I pulled out the old piece of deck to scribe out where the battery cover needed to go. Hacked out a dirty hole with the jigsaw, didn't need to be accurate. softened the edge, and basically just copied that old piece. I honestly could have used the old one, but I'd made everything else shiny and new, and it was probably quicker to make this out of offcuts than it was to take the paint off and re-waterproof the old one. With the deck done, we could move on to the steering plinth. Now, fortunately, I didn't have to rebuild this. I could actually salvage the top part. It was made by a proper shipwright, and he done a pretty good job, including putting a very good sealant onto the old leg connection, which was very difficult to chip away with the chisel, but we got there eventually. Former strippers, my favourite little demo tool, on the angle grinder to take off a couple of years worth of layered paint. And then these chonky 2x10s, they might have been 2x12s, now I think they're 2x10s, pieces of Oregon, and fortunately they were rough sawn, but I didn't need to make them perfect, I just needed to make them smooth-ish and square-ish. Because all they're going to be doing is holding up the steering console. This was a mighty big mitre cut on the 45 to have the steering wheel at the correct angle. Number 5, Melbourne Tool Company low-angle jack plane coming handy to get rid of my terrible power planing track lines, which I still haven't learned not to do. Now that looks a little low, but it will actually be another 100mm higher once it's mounted onto the frame. Trying to do as much as I can in the workshop, including getting all the bolts positioned and everything else screwed in. And pretty soon, the new plinth was good to go. I did add one more bracket in, which I don't show here, just lower down about a third of the way up between the legs to strengthen that. Hot dipped gel for all of the brackets to make them as weatherproof as possible. And while this won't need to be removed terribly often, again, for emergencies and rewiring, it could only be bolted down, not permanently fixed.
That's all the construction done. Should be solid enough. Get some paint onto it. Well, the primer at least anyway.
I think the leaf blower is the most underrated woodworking tool, particularly when it comes to clearing dust out of the workshop, so that it doesn't settle in your very expensive waterproof paint, well, primer. It was unfortunately windy and showery outside, so it was brush and roller and it took forever. Fortunately, the next day when I'm applying the second coat, g'day Darren, how's the shirt? I was able to do most of it with the paint sprayer, and bloody hell that thing saved me hours. Except for, well, getting underneath the frame. Speaking of which, I had to relabel everything because I had painted over my marks and then very methodically pull it apart because every single surface here needs to be covered, including the ends, including the screw holes, including all of the joins, and including where I rubbed off the paint carrying the things around. It would just make it last that much longer. Wood will not last forever on a boat, but hopefully doing it the right way, it'll get another 20 or 30 years like the old stuff did. And because you always forget something, I then had to get my long pieces and use the drill press to get the holes in, which will allow me to actually screw it to the boat with coach bolts.
Fukas. Handy Fukas. MVP. Installation day tomorrow.
Alrighty, install day. Back at the Raoul. It's been cleaned up a bit on the inside, which is nice. Larger deck pieces are still in the car, but I've got just about everything out here that I need to work on. I'm not going to film too much today, unfortunately, so I'll give you some just progress shots as we go along. But as a reminder, that's what we're working with. First order of business is to repair that bit of rotted deck that came off, and also to repair that structural beam under there, get some undercoat waterproofing on that before we start scribing in all of my bits and bobs. Right, these are the giant coach bolts that are being used to hold the main frame down. Now that's been cut to the right size. I think I filmed this one-handed. Oop, lost me a bit. Yeah, you get the idea. The new Kreg crosscut jig. Thank God it floats. Wasn't on the label, but ask me how I know. Yeah. I finally got the frame in. There was a lot of buggering around. I had to cut some joints in here in order to get into some good wood and to make everything the right size. That pipe there I had missed in my plans, which meant I had to shorten this section here, which then I meant to shorten the middle. I don't know what flow on effect that's going to have for the deck just yet, but it's probably going to be significant. So as it is a lovely evening, $1 million boat blocking the view of Sydney Harbour, it's nearly 5 o'clock. I think it's pretty much time to call it a day, and unfortunately I'm going to have to come back to do the rest of it. Build it square, but of course the bone ain't square. There's one thing about taking on big commissions and working for yourself. It was bloody great fun, and I get to see this view, but I really should be at home with the wife having dinner. You're a pretty city, Sydney. And I'm not done yet. I'll have to come back and do a few more hours work. I'm buggered. Day 2 of the install. Should only be a couple of hours left. Another terrible Sydney winter's day, would you believe? It is still technically winter. Spring is a week off, and it's all about fitting the last few deck sections. I know there's going to be adjustment because I have to shrink my frame, which means I'm going to have to shrink various bits of the deck to get that all fit on. But hopefully in a few hours we will be done here. So there's 4 sections of deck. We've got the 4 starboard side, the aft starboard side, and the port side deck, as well as the engine cover to go on. Engine cover will be last. Everything here has shrunk this way a little bit and this way a little bit. Now I knew that was kind of going to happen, so I've made these square, but obviously I've got to scribe in for the pipe work and the curve of the boat, and that's what we're going to do today. Trim off these pieces to fit down either side. It's going to be a bit of mucking around, but hopefully it won't take too long. And then when that's all done, we can do the final size on the engine cover, pop that on, and then the last job will be to mount the steering plinth. The deck is in. Not the best scribing in the world, but on a very unsquare boat. Cutting while moving. This has been something new for me actually. That's me holding the camera still, and we have ferries that go past, creating a bit of a wash. So I've had some sea legs when I've gotten back home from the jobs. Now, second last thing, bugger. Got to get that engine cover on and then mount the steering plinth over there. Let's get to that. Deck is in. Bit happy with that. Hand chamfered the little side back there. Everything shrunk down, cut to fit. Just the steering plinth. Let's get you in. All right, that is most of the work done. Loctite on the bolts, and that is rock solid. That's not going anywhere. That's the last screw. We're done. Ah, crap. Fixing that little bit of waterproof, and we're done. Ladies, gentlemen, and fake tradies, the Raoul with her new deck. I am pretty feckin' chuffed, I must say. Obviously, there's a lot of more work this boat could have done, but she is functional again. And after about, I'm going to say 50 hours of labour, I'm going to come on this side to try and keep my shadow out of the film. We have got everything back in. Because a poor carpenter or shows his mistakes, that is the only part I'm really unhappy with. I was trimming this down, scribing it in to fit, and it's all complex angles. There's nothing square there anywhere. And on my very last cut, I took the right amount off that end, but too much off this end. So I pointed it out to you so you'll see it, but hopefully not many other people will. I'm going to point it out to the boss too. He doesn't really care because this is a work boat. Everything is fitting. That is bolted down and hopefully never to move again. Beautiful new steering wheel. I'm on my shadow all over again. Everything there is done and dusted. That is by far and away the biggest job I think I've ever done. And I am very happy with it. Ooh, I got that on mic.